Hello, and welcome to Leaderfolk, an inclusive look inside the Jewish community. I'm your host, Sara Bogomolny. This episode is supported by our generous sponsor, Dog's Day Out, a new do-it-yourself dog wash and full-serve bathing and grooming salon located in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Today, I'm so pleased to welcome two guests, Kathryn Fleisher and Zoe Terner. Kathryn is the founder and executive director, and Zoe is the director of program and strategy at Not My Generation. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having us.
I'd love to start today just to have you both introduce yourselves, give us a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and a little bit about your Jewish identity. Kathryn, why don't you start us off?
For sure. So as you mentioned, my name is Kathryn Fleisher. I am a 22-year-old student at the University of Pittsburgh. I study politics and philosophy and gender, sexuality, and women's studies. But before I was here in Pittsburgh, I was originally from Cleveland, Ohio, where I'm part of the West Side Jewish community, a small but mighty Jewish community within the larger Cleveland area. I identify as a Reform Jew. I grew up in the Reform movement, heavily involved in the youth movement and the justice work of the Reform movement, but actually grew up interfaith and really came to Judaism as a means of personal identity and connecting to justice work. And I'm happy to talk about it more in detail, but yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Thank you. Cleveland Jewish community represent.
Yeah.
Zoe.
Sure. So my name's Zoe Terner. I'm a 20-year-old student at the University of Florida, go Gators, studying English and women's studies. I'm originally from South Florida in the Palm Beach area. Like Kathryn, I'm a member of the Reformed Jewish community and really became involved in my Jewish identity through youth organizing and youth leadership, and particularly as a way of connecting with justice work and social justice work.
What was the impetus for you to get involved in the Jewish community and also more specifically into the social justice work that you're both pursuing along several different avenues, not just along Not My Generation, which I know we haven't described yet, but we will get there. Zoe, you can start us off.
Sure. So I really became involved with my Jewish identity. I mean, obviously growing up, I went to synagogue and we celebrated the holidays, and Judaism was very much a familial and traditional thing for me. But in high school, I found Nifty and I joined our Southern Tropical region, and I'd really been looking for something to feel involved in and something where I could feel like I was making a difference and could make kind of a change. And I didn't quite know what that looked like yet. But when I joined Nifty, it gave me an image of what that could be. And it gave me a place where I felt like I could have an organized community of young people working to create tangible change on issues that mattered to them. So it provided really a structure for me that I think was really important to my organizing work. And then also the Jewish perspective and the Jewish background and morals and values for the work that I would eventually pursue.
Kathryn?
Yeah, my story is a little bit different. As I mentioned at the top, I grew up in an interfaith family. My dad grew up Jewish, my mom grew up Christian. But when they decided to have kids, they basically decided that they would kind of raise us to seek out what was meaningful to us. And so, we had a Christmas tree and a Hanukkah, and we did Passover, but we also did Easter egg hunts. So it was a little bit of a mix growing up. But I really always felt something when I was with Jewish community that I didn't feel anywhere else. And so when my family moved when I was in third grade, we used to live in Iowa. We relocated to Cleveland. When we moved, my parents kind of sat down, my sister and I, who were both kids at the time, and said, this is kind of up to you, but if you want to join a synagogue, now that we've are in a new place where there's a Jewish life, let's check it out and let us know if that's something you want to do. And so we visited this tiny little synagogue on the west side of Cleveland, Beth Israel, the West Temple, and it felt like home. I knew that I was in the place that I needed to be to become the version of myself that I knew was there, but that I hadn't tapped into yet. And so, at 9 years old, my parents let Judaism be a choice for me and for my little sister. And we chose it. And started building a community there. I went to the Goldman Union Camp Institute, the Reform Movements camp in Indiana when I was in seventh grade, which really formed my connection to Judaism and the Jewish community. And then from there, like Zoe, joined NIFTY, the Reformed Jewish Youth Movement, and then just fell in love with what the Jewish community is and can be, especially, when we look at what identity exploration looks like and youth empowerment and leadership development. And my whole world started to revolve around NIFTY and my community that I'd built there and Jewish values that I'd come to embrace because of my involvement in the movement. And kind of the rest has gone down in history of just, getting more and more involved in the Jewish community and waking up every day and deciding to be Jewish and being grateful that my parents gave me that option so long ago that I can make that decision and embrace it.
So I know that the main work that you're doing outside of being a student is around this organization, Not My Generation, which Kathryn, you founded. And Zoe, were you with the org from the very beginning?
Yeah.
Incredible. So Kathryn, if you could just tell us a little bit about the organization and the impetus for founding it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Not My Generation is a nonprofit committed to localized intersectional gun violence prevention advocacy for young adults. What we really aim to do is connect young people across lines of difference and help them to identify the needs of their community and then respond to it. So, for us, what that means is creating trainings and resources and networks and summits and we actually have our own podcast too called Root Causes, and we have all of these other resources and initiatives. But at the end of the day, all of it is about bringing people together across lines of difference to empower young people in their communities to step up, bridge divides, and kind of proactively evaluate their community's needs to be able to not only respond to gun violence as it's happening, but also look further upstream to understand why gun violence is happening in their community in the way that it is, and then respond to it in a proactive manner.
So, Kathryn, this episode is going to come out just a few days before the anniversary of the Tree of Life shooting, and I know that as a student at University of Pittsburgh, probably that incident was a profound one for you. And what influence did that have on the foundation of Not My Generation?
Yeah, absolutely. I think about October 27th, 2018 every day. It was a Saturday morning. Folks were gathering in Squirrel Hill, which is the Jewish neighborhood here in Pittsburgh. I was in my apartment about a mile and a half, and I started hearing all of these emergency vehicles outside. And I just had this sinking feeling like I knew something was happening in our community. I knew there was a shooting happening. I didn't know it was our community. I didn't know how close it was, but I just knew. And then I started getting texts from the university, the dreaded ones that every student knows about but doesn't want to see, the run, hide, fight texts in response to an active shooter. And that's when everything just kind of broke loose and people started calling to see if I was alive. I started calling friends and family and mentors who I know are typically at synagogue on Saturday mornings to check and see if they were alive. And it was just an experience that will be with me forever. And kind of in the aftermath of the shooting, I frankly didn't really know what to do with myself. I had some survivor's guilt, even though I was not there. I felt lost. I felt angry. I just didn't know what to do. And in that really dark time following the shooting, a lot of pain and a lot of sorrow, I found Jewish text in a way that changed everything for me. I have this little 12 by 12 poster in my apartment at school here that says "Tzedek, tzedek tirdof," justice, justice, you shall pursue. And I remember looking up at it and realizing that that was the only thing that made sense in that moment. That in all of this darkness and all of this pain, that the Jewish call to justice could be the light that we needed to pull ourselves up and build a better world. And so I kind of really leaned on that notion picked myself up and looked around and asked like what the community needed and what I could do. And the biggest thing that stuck out to me was the way that the Muslim community in Pittsburgh really showed up for the Jewish community. They essentially raised $250,000 overnight for medical and funeral expenses for victims and survivors of the shooting. Um, and I also heard a lot of people asking questions of like, what can we do? What can we do? And I realized that there was such power in building coalitions across lines of difference so that people could proactively understand one another and what their community's needs are so that we can show up and mobilize after tragedy, but that we can also use that immense power that coming together across lines of difference gives us to proactively make our communities safer and more just. And so that's kind of where the impetus for Not My Generation came in, where we said, what can we do to provide young people the space to create these coalitions in a way that is local, in a way that is intersectional from the start, and in a way that really thinks about gun violence in the way that impacts all communities. So for us and for the Tree of Life shooting, of course, we think about gun violence as an instance of a mass shooting, and we think about it as a hate crime. But we also know that other communities struggle with daily gun violence or suicide by firearm or domestic violence or police violence. And so we kind of used this model that was born out of this reaction to the Tree of Life shooting to found Not My Generation and create the space for that kind of coalition building and community organizing.
Thank you so much for sharing about that experience. It's really moving and beautiful to hear you tell the story and what came out of it. Zoe, what was it like to get brought into this project? What were those first steps of creating the organization like from your perspective?
Yeah, it was a very exciting kind of process in that it gave us a place to, I think, direct a lot of our energy, our frustration and grief and all of that. We had somewhere where we could put it. And I remember, Kathryn will talk about that Not My Generation started out just as a Google Doc, a singular Google Doc with ideas and thoughts and this concept of what would it look like if we came together across lines of difference? What would it look like if we were able to build localized coalitions? And from the Google Doc, we started to build a team. We started to put together people who might be interested in doing this kind of work and started to reach out to different organizational partners who we were really asking to take a gamble and to take a chance on us, because we were just this collection of young adults, mostly college students, who had never run a nonprofit before, who had never put together a summit before, but who were just really passionate and had a lot of passion and a lot of anger and wanted to do something with all of it. So we asked partners and donors and supporters to take that risk on us and to take the chance to come along for the ride with us. And along the way, we built up our team. We started planning for our first annual summit, which was in November of 2019, so last November, where we planned to bring together about 120 young adults ages around 18 to 25 for a weekend in Washington, D.C. And actually, our venue wound up being a synagogue in D.C. that so graciously offered to host us. So just another kind of connection to that Jewish space, that even though it wasn't a Jewish event, that it was when in our very first year, when we didn't have the money to sign a hotel contract. We were just a little tiny ragtag group of college kids. But a synagogue said, "Come stay here, come do your work here," and so we did. And 120 young adults from across the country took that same gamble on us and said, yeah, I'll come learn with you guys. I'll come stay with you guys and see what we can do and can create. So we brought them together, not as individuals, but as members of those kind of diverse, localized coalitions we knew that there could be so much power in. And that weekend was really, it was like seeing everything on that Google Doc, that like singular document that only existed online, come to life before our very eyes, and having the passion and dedication and commitment and struggle of so many different people who cared so much about the thing that we cared so deeply about, and who were not only dedicated but ready to do something about it. Having all of that energy in one room was one of the most powerful things I've ever been able to experience. And then from there, we were kind of like, all of our energy leading up to that moment had been to create the summit. And so afterwards we were like, is Not My Generation a summit? Is Not My Generation an organization? What do we do from here? And I couldn't have even imagined how we would have grown and continued from that point in November on. And now, oh my gosh, I guess almost a year later, our team is ever growing and our coalitions add to themselves and do amazing things every day. And we look towards, obviously this year is a little bit different and a lot of our opportunities are virtual, but we still see people coming together to create those spaces, even online, like we saw in person in November. So it's been a really, honestly, the most powerful and incredible opportunity I've ever had the chance to be a part of. I'm so lucky to be a member of Not My Generation.
Did either of you have doubts when you were forming Not My Generation based on your background to say, I really want to make an impact in this space, but I don't know if I have the knowledge? Or were you just confident that you would be able to do the learning that was kind of required of it? What was your thought process around that part?
I think that's a really, really good question. And my answer is going to be a little bit Jewish here, which I suppose is on brand. Which
Totally.
is that we really knew that whatever we decided to do, if we were willing to put the energy behind it and we were willing to let, like Zoe was talking about, that those raw emotions and our passion and our anger and let it flow into something, as long as we were constantly willing to learn, that we would be able to make it work. So I never really doubted that we could do it. I didn't really think it would turn into what it is today. And that is very much like a testament to how incredible the Not My Generation team is. All of our organizers and our directors just put in so much work. But I think the reason that we're successful is we all come from different backgrounds, and that's our strength. So we've been really intentional about building a team that is gender diverse, racially diverse, geographically diverse, and so on and so forth, so that we can, hit different communities, hit different backgrounds, acknowledge our shortcomings, and really be honest with each other about what we do and don't know. And I think that's actually been one of my favorite things about working with Not My Generation is we constantly prioritize self-education. So, for example, every week on our director calls, we do an internal learning opportunity where one of us presents to the rest of the board about something related to gun violence or an issue that perpetuates the gun violence epidemic. And so we're really always trying to learn and hear directly from people who are most impacted. And by having a diverse team from the start, we really ensure that no matter what people come into a space knowing, that we can be constructive in admitting what we don't know, listening to people who are most impacted, and then turning that, using our resources and our privilege in our communities, into something productive.
We take a deeper dive into the youth-led aspect of Not My Generation after a message from our sponsor. This podcast is sponsored by Downtown Dogs Daycare and Boarding, where furry family members play and stay by the hour, day, week, or longer, and Dog's Day Out, featuring 7 socially distanced dog bathtubs and the Zen Den for Shire pups. Located near the Minneapolis Farmers Market, we offer curbside fetch and retrieve upon request. All breeds, sizes, and ages welcome. Visit us at dtdogs.com and dogsdaympls.com. I know that the youth-led aspect of Not My Generation is such an important pillar of the work that you're doing. So, what are you learning as young people doing the work now that you think previous generations missed out on or might need a reminder about?
So I can take this one first, and then I'm sure Zoe has many a thought as well. This is something we talk about a lot. I think that the biggest thing that young organizers lean into that has meant a lot to me, and that I consistently look up to in the leadership of other youth-run organizations, is the willingness to collaborate and the willingness to share and the willingness to not make the work about the organization. There's something called the nonprofit industrial complex that we've spent some time studying as we are intentionally trying to avoid becoming part of it. But the idea of the nonprofit industrial complex is that, there are organizations that exist to work on an issue, but resolving that issue would mean resolving the organization, which is people's jobs and, a brand they've built and likely somebody's philanthropy. And so I think what a lot of young people have done and what we've tried to do is to say that our end goal is to have Not My Generation be irrelevant, right? Like we want communities to be so in touch with what they need and for communities to be so safe and like self-directed that there's no reason for us to do the work that we're doing. Our ultimate goal at the end of the day is not about Not My Generation. It's not about us. It's not about our careers or our resumes or anything. This is about justice and equity and people's lives. And we consistently center that in a way that ensures that the work is going to be productive for the people who need it most, and not just for the benefit of anybody running the organization.
Zoe?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it reminds me a little bit of what you and I talked about the other day, Sarah, about kind of our long-term vision for Not My Generation and how people like Kathryn and I and the rest of our board of directors fit into that vision. And the whole idea that Not My Generation is very intentionally an organization run both by and for young people. And there will come a day where Kathryn and I are no longer young people. And so that means that there will also come a day where we don't need to be the people at the center of the organization. And in fact, it would probably be harmful for us to be those people. Mm-hmm. But that's okay, because the whole idea is that we're building something that is so much bigger than ourselves, and that we want to be sustainable and we want to be enduring, even when it's the right and appropriate thing for people like us to step back and for younger people than us, new young people, to take the reins. And also, hopefully, there won't have to be so many generations of new young people picking up that mantle of leadership. Hopefully, like Kathryn said, we work ourselves into being obsolete, because that's the ultimate goal.
And to add on to that too, because per usual, Zoe has inspired many a thought for me. I think also we know that we're planting seeds in a garden we may not get to see. And I think that oftentimes when we talk to, we sometimes say adults, because we're adults, but don't always feel exactly like adults, definitely young adults. But we talk to quote unquote adults. People always ask us, like, oh, like we haven't seen any meaningful legislative change on the national level. Like, what makes you think you can do anything different? Or, people have been fighting for this for so long and nobody cares. Why are you putting all of this time and energy into something in the way that you are? And our answer is kind of like, it's not about us. It's not about seeing results. It's not about having something to tout. It's not about, any sort of numbers or diagnostics. It's about safety and justice and equity. And if that means that we have to work and never see results, but know that it's working towards building a more just society, that's fine. And that's what we're going to do. And I think we look at, incremental change, and we focus on local policy in particular, because frankly, it's not as big and flashy, and not as many people are working on it. And so we have a greater opportunity to make tangible change and to lay the groundwork for future justice work that will continue to improve safety and justice and equity in our communities.
I want to jump back to something you said a moment ago, Kathryn, about the nonprofit industrial complex and trying not to center the organization and putting the focus on the work. And I'm curious, in your role as executive director and in this kind of new organization that's taking shape over the past few years, is that something that's hard to explain to donors or sponsors? Is that a roadblock for you in building your impact through Not My Generation?
I'm really glad that you asked that, because I think that we don't talk frankly and honestly enough about funding for projects, for work, for organizations, and being a young adult-led organization, money and resources is something we do not have a lot of. We all do all of this work on our own time. None of us get paid. The directors put in between 20 and 40 hours a week, and then we have committees and local organizers and regional organizers who also put in, 10, 15, 20 hours a week, and none of us are paid, and we just do it. But I think that also means that sometimes donors look at us and think, oh, well, they're not a quote unquote real organization because they don't have staff, or they're not a real organization because they don't have an office. And And it's really tough for us to explain to donors, like, we don't want an office. Like, yes, we would love to have the money to be able to compensate our organizers for their time as a matter of equity and of access, and ensuring that those from all like socioeconomic statuses have the ability to do community organizing. But beyond that, like, we're not interested in building up an organization that's going to persist for generations. Like, we're called Not My Generation for a reason, because we want to be the last like main generation of people who have to look at our kids in the eyes and say, I'm sorry we didn't solve this solvable epidemic for you. And it's important that, donors know that just because we are not spending money in a traditional way doesn't mean that we're not using it wisely, or that we're not able to make change. Fundraising for a startup organization is really, really tough. And a lot of folks in the Jewish community were really generous in helping us out. A lot of synagogues and rabbis put their faith in us, which was fantastic. But frankly, it was a huge uphill battle. And we had a lot of issues with people, saying how proud they were of us and how young people should take the helm and patting us on the back. But when push came to shove and we needed support, they weren't willing to put their money where their mouth is. So I would say to anyone who's listening to this who has the means, if you ever are looking around at any group of people, whether it's young people, whether it's people of color, whether it's differently abled people, and you are, patting them on the back and congratulating them, consider putting, your money where your mouth is, and giving them the resources they need to do the work. Because at the end of the day, we have the energy, we have the passion, we have the ideas, we just need the resources to make it happen.
What are your plans for after graduation? Is that the cutoff point where you're no longer young adults? As a 26-year-old, I have started cringing because so many young adult things cut off at 25, and I'm like, oh my God, don't tell me that's true. But yeah, I'm just curious to know, as you look into the future, whether it's your work with Not My Generation or, a longer term look at what you hope to do with your lives and careers. What are you looking forward to? Zoe, you can take this one first.
Sure. So I think the answer is a little bit complicated, because on one hand, I think the dream is that we wake up tomorrow morning and gun violence doesn't exist anymore, and so neither does Not My Generation. And on the other hand, as long as gun violence does continue to persist, so will we. So I think it's something we're going to continue to navigate as Kathryn and I get older and start to graduate college, and we'll really just feel how long it makes sense for us as individuals to remain part of the organization. Our kind of constituency is around 18 to 25. So that's kind of the age range we've been thinking about a little bit. But I think it's something we'll grow and evolve with. Personally, my long-term goal is to go to law school, and I'd love to eventually be a public defender. I see that being really connected with Not My Generation and the work we do, and actually really inspired by so many of the things I've learned with Not My Generation, because I think one of the things we're really intentional about is the fact that gun violence isn't just mass shootings. Gun violence is uplifted and supported by all of the systems of oppression in this country. And that includes sexism and racism and classism and our broken criminal legal system. And through this work, I've learned so much about each of those systems, and I've learned about the ways that I can hopefully contribute, even if it's in small ways, to breaking down those enduring systems of oppression that exist in our country. So I really see that as being a next step for me, but a step that is very connected to the work that I've done with Not My Generation.
Kathryn?
Yeah, I feel very similarly to Zoe. Obviously, I'm a little older and a little closer to my young adult retirement age, but I really think that I'll probably stick with Not My Generation for another year or two as I continue to, build up our leadership, build up our resources, and then, spend some of that time getting it ready to pass along. I don't plan to stay with Not My Generation forever. Probably, so I intend to go to grad school. I recently became a Truman Scholar, and so through that, I have the opportunity to attend a fellowship program in Washington, D.C., and then attend grad school. So that's my plan as of now. And I actually plan to do gun policy for my master's. I plan to pursue a joint Master's of Public Policy and Master's of Public Health, specifically to look at gun violence and how other upstream factors, like Zoe talked about, impact the epidemic as it is today. So that's kind of like my trajectory, and I assume, handing off Not My Generation to the next generation of leaders will be part of that plan. But yeah, ultimately, I want to do whatever I can to utilize my organizing experience and my policy knowledge to ensure that communities are safe and to ensure that we're actually creating opportunity for access to resources, access to meaningful livelihoods. And like Zoe said, yes, that could look like what we traditionally think of in terms of gun policy and doing research in that space and writing policy in that space. But at the end of the day, it's also about, thinking about how America is founded on a racist system with slavery and how that turned into a racist policing system and how that has led into our broken criminal legal system and how all of these other factors continue to persist and pile on. And so kind of diving headfirst into that crazy mix of oppression and opportunity to untangle oppression and reveal justice. So that's what I intend to do. However that may look, what's most important to me is just ensuring that I'm consistently using my time and energy in some way to make the world a better place, which I know sounds naive and something that, a kid might say, but actually the older I've gotten, the more I believe that if you're someone who really wants to commit yourself to doing good in the world, if you wake up every day and say, tzedek tzedek tirdov, justice you shall pursue, and you make that a center of your life, then everything that you do is going to be ultimately working towards that.
Beautifully said. I just have one final question for you both, which is, with the chaotic nature of 2020 really changing everybody's expectations for the year, and with the work that you're involved in being quite heavy at times, what are you doing lately to take care of yourselves or to add a little fun?
I don't, there's a reason it was quiet.
We're both thinking, we're like,
Zoe and I are both like, does doing additional organizing count? I don't know. I mean, frankly, yes, self-care obviously is important, and taking care of mental health is obviously important. And I do what I can to, find solace in community and, take time off to, cook and read and listen to podcasts, which is what I do in my spare time because I'm a super fun 22-year-old. But also for me, especially, having the privilege of being an upper middle class white woman, I know that it would be really easy for me to say, okay, I'm going to take today off from doing justice work. But that's not how it works for communities who are most impacted. Communities who are consistently targeted by police don't get to take a day off from being Black, don't get to take a day off from being a target of police. Communities that consistently face hate crimes because of sexuality don't get to take a day off from being queer, don't get to take a day off from presenting as something that makes people feel fearful of them. And so for me, it's really important that I stay in that fight with them each and every day, because that's what being an ally means. It means standing with the community no matter what. And so that's what I do. And of course, again, that means taking little breaks. It means, knitting and reading and cooking, but it means doing this every day.
Yeah, I completely agree. I also think in kind of a maybe strange sounding way, doing work with Not My Generation and being a member of this incredible community that we've been able to build and to organize together often feels like self-care. On days that are particularly crazy in the world, or on anniversaries like the one we're approaching, being able to have our group chat of our Not My Generation directors who get it and who feel the frustration that I feel, or who feel the anger that I feel, is really meaningful and worthwhile to me, and something that I've sometimes struggled to find in other spaces that I've been in. So I think just as much as doing the work of justice and doing the work of gun violence prevention organizing can often be emotionally taxing, I think it's also often uplifting in ways that I really hadn't expected it to be. And it reminds me that I have to stay in it and that there's no option other than to keep going, because I can't even imagine the alternative.
Thank you. That is so beautiful. You are both incredibly inspiring, and I am honored to be able to connect our listeners to your expertise and your innovation in this space. And thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Leaderfolk is all about elevating voices and starting conversations. So now we'd love to hear from you. Email us at podcast@tcjewfolk.com to share your thoughts, your ideas, or to nominate future guests. Leaderfolk is a project of Jewfolk Inc. and the Jewfolk Podcast Network. For more information, visit tcjewfolk.com/podcast. Thank you again to our generous sponsor, Dogs Day Out, Minneapolis' new do-it-yourself dog wash and full-serve bathing and grooming salon. Shabbat Shalom.